Hello and welcome to a video of Miss Rose talking about history. Today we're going to focus in our unit on our founding documents. We're going to be talking about the Constitution, and we're going to specifically focus on the 6 big ideas of the Constitution. So this is just, I did a drawing of all the 6 big ideas to help my students remember what they are. So this is just my drawing, but you can see here the title of your page for these notes is going to be the 6 big ideas of the Constitution. I would like for you to leave yourself some space next to each of these big ideas so that you can draw a little picture to help you remember. But we're going to talk through the notes first for 3 of them, and then I'll show you 3 sample images. So, whoever is the substitute, if there is one, or maybe it's me, pause the video, let the kids have some time to write. And we're back. So the first concept that is important in our Constitution, that our founding fathers made sure that there were lines and concepts regarding, is this idea of limiting our government. If you think contextually, we had a very powerful government in King George, who we thought of as a tyrant at the time. So limiting the power of that government is a natural reaction. The federal government, according to a policy of limited government, the federal government does not have absolute power, but neither do the states. Therefore, there is limiting what our federal government and limiting what our states can do. So just in case, as a vocab term, the term federal government is the national government of a country, not the governments of the states, but our government as a whole. So think our president and all that we saw in Washington, D.C., that's all federal government, rather than Tallahassee, which contains all of our state government buildings and branches. The second concept is called republicanism. This is, again, the moment for the pause. Right. Republicanism is the idea of embracing our republic. A republic means that leaders are elected to represent people in Congress. So anytime we have the concept of electing someone, you are looking at the idea of republicanism in our Constitution. The third one, which to me might be the most important, is popular sovereignty. So sovereignty, which is not the vocab word you just learned, sovereign, means the power to rule, whereas sovereign means one's rule over themselves. So they are connected words, but we use them differently. In this case, popular, meaning the people, and sovereignty, the power to rule, means that the people are the ones in charge of the government. And that's what creates our definition, that the government is created by and subject to the will and the ideas of the people. So if there is a concern amongst the people, for example, perhaps Floridians have a concern. Oh, you know what? Here's a good one. Daylight savings time. A huge argument around our country. Like, do we need it? Should we use it? If enough people felt strongly that this was an issue, the people could write to representatives who then are forced, but through popular sovereignty, to listen to their ideas and send a bill through Congress. And there's been lots of attempts at getting rid of daylight savings time through that exact process, but none of them have really worked. So these are the 3 images I drew for those first 3 concepts. So when we think about limited government, I think about Goldilocks and the 3 bears, that our government is meant to be not too powerful and not too weak, somewhere right in the middle. It needs to be just right. So limiting what each branch of the federal government can do, or limiting what the state governments have the ability to do. For republicanism, I drew a super cute I voted sticker because it's all about voting for the people who are in charge of us. Taxation without representation, that is an issue of republicanism. Popular sovereignty, I drew a little scroll. It says, "We the people." And then a little guy that represents the government saying, "It's for them." And then the people over there saying, "It's for me." because the power of our government is by and for and created with respect to the people. So this would be a good opportunity to pause and to take maybe 5 minutes to just jot some doodles. They do not have to be colorful. If you, as a substitute, allow the use of my book boxes with students, I am okay with that as long as they end up put back and well taken care of. All right, so we need our next 3 big ideas, because there are 6. The next big idea is called federalism. Federalism refers to a shared power between the federal government and the states. So remember, the federal government is our central government, the government of the United States. And if limited government talks about how they each have some power, but that power needs to be limited to make sure that no one's in too much control. Federalism is about sharing that power between the government and the states. So the fact that states need to approve, if a state needs to approve something that the federal government did, that would be federalism, because there's a shared power there. But also, our powers need to be separate. Separation of powers is equally important. So separation of powers has to do with each branch of the federal government, legislative, executive, and judicial, and each has their own responsibilities. They do not overlap. So kids tend to get these two confused. Federalism is sharing between the federal government and states, specifically shared with states. Whereas separation of powers is not separating the federal government and the states. It's separating the branches of the federal government from each other. That the legislative branch does not have the powers that the president and the executive branch does. And that branch does not have the power that the judicial branch and the courts do. And the courts don't have the same power to make laws. So legislative can only make laws, executive can only enforce them, and judicial can only judge them. They cannot perform each other's duties. Really important, because in England, again, context, the enforcers of the king, consider tax collectors or generals or officers, military officers sent over, would be executive branch. They are in charge of enacting laws, but then they would immediately charge guilt upon someone, which is technically the job of the judicial branch, and then that person would be put on a prison ship to go back to England to serve out their charges. So they would be immediately judged without a trial. And we do not want anyone from any branch to override anyone else from any other branch. But we do want them to check each other and balance each other. So each branch of the federal government has, quote unquote, like checks on all of the other branches to make sure that they don't have unlimited power, because their power has to be separate, but it cannot be unlimited. So through separating powers and checking and balancing them, we are often able to enact that our first big idea of limited government. But specifically back to checks and balances, each branch of the federal government has checks on all other branches to make sure they don't have that unlimited power. So the best way to understand this is through example, which is that if the legislative branch makes laws, the executive branch can't make any, but the executive branch can veto or deny the law goes into effect. And then as a further check, if the legislative branch does not agree with the presidential veto, there's a way for them to override that supreme power as well. The Supreme Court has the ability to judge all laws made, but the Supreme Court is created by the president and the executive branch. So the branches work together to make sure that no one's power is unlimited. Because if the Supreme Court could judge anyone however they want, that would make them an incredibly powerful entity and something to be afraid of in the American system of government. Same with the president. He's not allowed to just do whatever he wants. He has to go through other people in other branches of the government to make sure that their choices are going to be in the best interests of the people. So this is, again, all supporting popular sovereignty. So if you look at these three, notice that these three all have to do with how the federal government works. Separation of powers and checks and balances are about branches of the federal government. Federalism is shared power between the federal and the state governments. So these are related, right? Speaking of, these three are related. The limited government discusses where the power is, that it's not absolute for anyone. Republicanism is how we get that power, through elections of people, and popular sovereignty talks about how the people, therefore, are responsible for government. So these three all have to do with how we limit our government and form it so that the people are the primary objective, or the beneficiaries of the government, the creators of the government, the ones who both create it and reap its benefits. And these three are all about how our federal government, and specifically our branches, work, or our branches connected to the states. So for these three, I do also have pictures. So for federalism, I like to draw a Venn diagram, one side being states, one side being federal government, and in the middle is their shared power. Note how smart I am. I used blue and yellow, and they make green. Oh, Miss Rose, you're so great. I know. Separation of powers is the fact that there are, I drew three separate drawings to represent our three separate branches. So as you can see, I date myself in this drawing. Can you see who I drew as the president? Yep. Notice his slightly orangish tinged face. Ha! Either way, he was our president at the time, so I drew a tiny, look, he's got his determined face on, a tiny Donald Trump for executive branch. For legislative, I drew a law, and that's supposed to be a little quill, like to write the law, but it's not my best drawing. And then for the judicial branch, I drew a gavel hitting, like the thing that it hits in the courtroom. And I wrote order, like order in the court. Another thing you could draw for each of these is the different buildings that we housed in. We saw the White House, we saw Congress, we saw the Supreme Court, or anything that reminds you for the legislative that it makes laws, the executive that it enacts laws, and the judicial that it judges laws. For checks and balances, I created a check and a scale to show that they balance each other. So that's one version of the drawing, but I also drew a little E to represent the executive branch and how they interact with the judicial branch, and the judicial branch enacts with them. And how they enact with the legislative branch, and the legislative branch interacts with them. And the legislative interacts with the judicial, and the judicial interacts with them. So I created like a drawing to represent how they all work together to check and balance each other's power. So, based upon this video, once you are completed, you should have a page or 2 pages of notes that includes information about all 6 of our big ideas in our government, and 6 small sort of doodle drawings that represent those ideas in your own way. We are going to need these 6 big ideas because they are how we are going to interpret our constitutions. When I get back, the plan will be that we are going to read each of those blue parts of our Constitution and summarize it in our own words, just like we've been doing with all of our documents recently, and then apply one of these big ideas that you think the quote best represents. So there will be quotes that separate out exactly what power the legislative branch has. There will be quotes that show how the executive branch can veto laws of the legislative branch. There will be quotes that show we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, that it's all for the people. There will be tons of quotes, especially in our really big Article 1, that show how we vote and how we can represent, how we create Congress to have a representation in our government. And there will be plenty of things that it says that the states or the federal government cannot do in order to limit their power and say, or create a system that is like just right for us. So that is our lesson today. It's a lesson on the 6 big ideas of the Constitution. If there is any time left in class, make sure your doodles are all together, that your notes are straight, and that you've completed all of your assignments for history for this week, because there was some confusion. And I will see you back on Monday. I love you.